Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to our Team Tuesday, and this week we have with us Drew Craig. Hey Drew, welcome back.
Hey, thank you so much. Happy Tuesday.
Absolutely. Happy Tuesday, everybody. So we're going to talk about teams and how sometimes they become their own worst enemies. But before we dive into that, Drew, do share with us, what's the book that most influenced you in your career as a Scrum Master?
You know, I have a whole shelf full of books. And I actually put out a LinkedIn post a couple weeks ago, how I ordered some new books and also realizing that I have a very high book in progress. I tend to be a referencer. I tend to not read cover to cover. But some of the books that I felt very impactful, I can't name one, but I'll name a couple. And they're not always directly related to our work, maybe just a little off related. So Drive by Dan Pink, I thought was a very enlightening book, very easy to read. It's one of the books that you'll find yourself nodding your head and say, that makes sense. I just never really actually thought about it in that tangible context. But he talks about the three intrinsic motivators, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And it was very impactful because it helps to ground you in your role. And I think it also helps to enter into the system from a different perspective than, let's say, like what the Scrum Guide says, which you would never hear me ever reference anything like that. But we do tend to do that, right? That's how we learn. But that doesn't always help the teams. So when you're able to introduce a different perspective of thought that can resonate with your audience or your team, that's very impactful. And I use that on a regular basis. You'll even catch me throwing the intrinsic motivators into a slide deck. Another book that I actually read recently was called Multiplier by Liz Wiseman. And this was a book, as I move into different leadership types of roles, this is a book that was very enlightening for me to help think about how I can strengthen those around me, that how I can shift from doing to enabling, because often we tend to do. A lot of times that's our comfort zone. And one of the hardest things with leadership is to building that coalition around you and making them feel stronger and you helping them to be better than you are, and to delegate. And this book helps you to recognize different ways to do that, different ways to think about it. And it just brings it top of mind. So when you're doing your thing day to day, you're thinking about how can I be a multiplier, not a diminisher.
That's a great question. How can I be a multiplier?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
These are things that we want to ask ourselves on a daily basis. Because again, if we want to grow, then sometimes growing isn't being better at what we do. It's sometimes changing the perspective and how we approach or think about what we already do.
Absolutely. And a great question to add to our Friday reflection as Scrum Masters. How can I be a multiplier? Thanks for the recommendations there, Drew. And we'll put the link in the show notes so that people can find the books very easily. But now let's turn our attention to the teams. I was talking a minute ago how sometimes teams can become their own worst enemies. And we've all seen teams kind of, disintegrate, self-destruct, or just create problems for themselves in the way that they act with each other, the topics they choose to bring up, the process aspects they choose to focus on, whatever the reason might be. So let's explore one of those stories, Drew. Tell us a little bit about the team so that we understand their context, and then walk us through how those small little behaviors or patterns of behaviors kind of developed over time and eventually became a problem for the team.
Yeah, and I think the example that I'm going to share with the group is one that we can all resonate with. It's quite a simple and probably profound problem, but it doesn't always seem as such at first. And this is the one where our backlog is overburdened with work
Do you mean like too
and
long or?
too much work. We're hoarders.
Yeah. Never
And
drop anything, right?
oh, no, because we might want to do it at some point, or we already put this much effort into maybe crafting the work. We certainly don't want to throw it away. The challenge is when committing to too much work in a given sprint, let's say, or any time box, and tricking ourselves into rationalizing why we think we can do all of that work. And the self-destruction connection is it's demotivating to continually commit to a large body of work and to continually not achieve it. And I am the last person that you'll ever hear talk about that we need to deliver what we commit to, right? That, to me, that's not the goal. The goal is, do we understand enough about what we can do that we can at least reduce the variability? So we can at least have some semblance of predictability for longer term planning. And this team would perpetually commit to like 100% more work than they can deliver. And if you look at the history, and it was demoralizing for the developers, and it was a stake in the ground for the product owner. And and I wasn't a Scrum Master at the time, so this was a coaching opportunity for the Scrum Master. How can you help the team to understand that we don't have to commit to all of this?
So
And
how can you, by the way, that's a great question. How can you
yes,
help the team understand that they don't need to overcommit?
yes. Well, this is where we start to look at data. And I mentioned earlier, just because we think something is happening or we have some perception of what's happening, it doesn't mean that that is actually what is going on. So we might think we're delivering a lot, but this is where we can look at our data, whether it's our velocity chart or any other chart that's available to us in these tools. Let's imagine Jira, right? We can certainly use our burn down charts during the sprint, but when we look at any historical averages over time, we should have a sense of what we can deliver. And Jira will tell you that, whether it's by issue, which I typically would lean towards, or story point. Some folks may like to use story points, but it gives you a stake in the ground on a starting point. And you should also be able to connect to things like a roadmap or a release plan. So now you can start to talk about outcomes versus outputs. So these were some of the areas that I would work with the Scrum Master for to introduce these topics and learning opportunities with the team. The challenge was that the perception of committing to a lot of work to our leadership looked good, right? And this is probably something that we can all relate with. So now you're battling a different entity that has an anti-pattern of we start to just live in this world of theater where we commit to a lot of work and then we have some excuse at the end, as opposed to being able to show success in the value that we delivered. So it goes back to shifting the conversation. Now, that was a hard lesson for the team to adopt because they were fearful of the way it would look to leadership if they reduced the amount they committed to. And to be honest, that was a lesson that took us a long time to start to shift, because it wasn't one team. It turned out to be the whole system. So
Yeah,
now
of
we're in a
course.
different,
Yeah,
so it's a larger thing to work through. And the answer was working with leadership, right? So spanning those horizontal boundaries to move up to a different level. So leadership understood, and leadership could provide the message. And that's when we started to see the difference.
And this self-fulfilling prophecy of doom is so easy to get into, right? Because you always feel that you can deliver what you think needs to be delivered. I remember talking to a team, and we actually made a bet with the product owner at that time. And I remember talking to a team, and they had been delivering 5 to 8 items every sprint for a few sprints. And in order for them to hit the release date, they would need to deliver a minimum of 15 items by each sprint until the end of the delivery or the release. And when we asked the team, so what do you think you will deliver? Guess what they said? They said 15. And obviously it wasn't how do you say? It wasn't a number that they thought and analyzed and validated that they could deliver. It was the number they thought they needed to deliver, right? And there's this almost unstoppable desire to make other people happy, in this case, the product owner. And that clouds our judgment and our ability to reflect on what is actually possible.
Yes. And a lot of those lessons carry through with me to this day as we become a little bit more data oriented. And we start to introduce flow into our day-to-day and start to just, again, I'll say it again, change the way we interact with each other and our work, but we start to look at different types of metrics. So maybe these sprint metrics aren't as valuable to us. We're looking at maybe different levels of granularity when we think about how long work stays in a particular status, or how long work might take to traverse from one status to another status. Then we can start to have different conversations. But yes, you're absolutely right. We fall into this. I love that self-fulfilling prophecy, and we end up on the hamster wheel again. I'll use the phrase you used earlier.
Yeah, when I was a project manager way back when, we called this the crunch time and the death march, right? It's like we put ourselves into this kind of context where the only way to succeed is to go beyond what's reasonable, and we go beyond what's reasonable, and that's the scary part for me.
Yes.
Great story. Thank you for sharing that, Drew.
Yes, absolutely. I was just going to say, someone said you need to give yourself room to really accelerate, and I guess pedal to the metal is the metaphor, but you can't do that all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Otherwise it's burnout.
Exactly.
Tuesday is Team Day here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. But tomorrow we talk about something that goes beyond the work we do with the teams. We will talk about how to lead change and what our guests have learned from leading and participating in change programs during their career. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.